On the audit exam, one of the miscellaneous topics that might show up is how to disclose the existence of a component auditor. AUC Section 600 outlines standards related to component auditors. So the new standard is going to more clearly illustrate that group auditors have certain responsibilities, including the determination of the extent of the involvement of component auditors. Okay, so long story short, we have a group auditor, which we're going to also consider as the primary auditor in this audit engagement. Okay, so think of this as your big four accounting firm. And sometimes what will happen is that when a group auditor is auditing a large corporation, sometimes that corporation is just too big. They might need to bring in another audit firm to help them out. Okay, so think of this as sort of an outsourced audit firm that is coming in to help out and audit a component of these financial statements. Okay, so the group auditor is going to bring in another small accounting firm to audit a component of the financial statements. So a component is defined as a specific entity or business activity for which financial information is separately prepared. Okay, but the whole idea here is that a component is going to be included within the group financial statements. Okay, so maybe this is a subsidiary of the large corporation. So that makes the component auditor the auditor performing the work on the financial statements of a specific component, right? Because that subsidiary or that business activity is relevant to the final audit opinion that is reported. Okay, so before the group auditor uses the component auditor, they have to understand who they are, right? They're going to be associated with the audit report. So let's say that the big four accounting firm is bringing on Joe Schmo CPA PC. They want to understand who Joe Schmo is. So in order to do that, they're going to understand things like whether the component auditor is independent and will comply with all relevant ethical requirements, the professional competence of the component auditor, the extent to which the group engagement team will include work of a component auditor, the group engagement team's ability to obtain information from the component auditor, and whether the component auditor operates in a regulatory environment that actively oversees the work of its auditors. Right? In other words, we want to make sure that we could trust these guys to do their job. On the audit section of the CPA exam, it might be tempting for you to try to memorize your way through it, specifically when thinking about what should be included in things like the emphasis of matter or the other matter paragraph within that audit report. But the reality is there's just too much detail that the examiners can ask related to, say, how the disclosure of the existence of a component auditor should be made. So when making that determination, we need to understand whose decision this even is. And the reality is this is going to be the decision of the group auditor, right? The primary auditor. So now that they understand Joe Schmo and the component auditor's work, they can now make the determination as to whether or not they want to take responsibility for this work. Right? At the end of the day, we want to understand whether or not we want to be liable for Joe Schmo's work on this component. So if we think Joe Schmo CPA always does a good job, then we'll take the responsibility for them because we trust them. In which case, how would this be reported? This is a question the CPA exam loves to ask. Because the group auditor is taking on responsibility, no disclosure would be necessary. But if, on the other hand, Joe Schmo CPA has a history of drinking on the job, right, at this point, they might not want to take responsibility for Joe Schmo's work. Now, obviously, that's an exaggeration. But the point is, if they don't trust them, then they're generally not going to take responsibility for their work. In which case, how would we report this? It still needs to be reported that we used a component auditor. Well, if there's an unmodified opinion, then the auditor would report this in the auditor responsibility paragraph of the audit report. But if, on the other hand, this was a modified opinion, right, maybe it was qualified, disclaimer, or there's an adverse opinion, then an additional disclosure would need to be made in either an emphasis of matter paragraph or an other matter paragraph. Okay, at the end of the day, it's not about just memorizing. We have to also see what is happening here. We need to understand the intuition.